It started with a document that officially did not exist. No announcement, no ceremony, no statement from Buckingham Palace. Yet whispers began spreading through royal circles that a sealed decree had been circulated among Privy Council members under extraordinary confidentiality. What made the rumors explosive was not the document itself, but the names allegedly attached to it. Within days, senior aides were refusing comment, longtime courtiers were avoiding questions, and speculation was building toward one chilling possibility. Someone's access to the royal world had just been erased. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the story sounded too extraordinary to be taken seriously. Royal households have always been fertile ground for rumors, and palace corridors have long echoed with speculation that never becomes reality. But this felt different. The silence surrounding the alleged decree was not the ordinary silence that follows gossip. It was the kind of silence that makes people pay attention, the kind that appears when those closest to the truth are suddenly unwilling to speak. Reports began emerging from multiple royal watchers that a confidential Privy Council document had been discussed among a very limited circle of officials. No one publicly confirmed its contents. No one acknowledged its existence. Yet the same details kept surfacing from different directions. According to those whispers, the decree concerned access, not titles, not inheritance, not succession. Access. That distinction immediately raised questions. Access to what? Access to whom? And perhaps most importantly, why now? For years, Queen Camilla's family occupied a unique position around the monarchy. They were connected to the crown through marriage, but remained outside the formal structure of royal duty. It was an arrangement that appeared stable on the surface. Yet, according to palace observers, discussions surrounding the boundaries of that relationship had quietly intensified over recent years. The rumors grew stronger when several senior aides reportedly declined opportunities to dismiss the claims. Normally, palace representatives move quickly to extinguish stories that threaten to spiral out of control. This time, however, there was no forceful denial, no coordinated effort to shut down the speculation. Instead, there was only an unusual absence of comment. That absence fueled even more questions. Some royal commentators began suggesting that the alleged decree may have involved restrictions connected to invitations, private royal gatherings, estate privileges, or access to certain institutional circles. Others believed the matter was tied to a broader effort to redefine who would play a role in the monarchy's future as the royal family continued adapting to changing circumstances. Whatever the truth was, one fact became impossible to ignore. People inside royal circles appeared nervous. Conversations that had once flowed freely were reportedly becoming guarded. Longtime courtiers who usually enjoyed discussing palace affairs suddenly had very little to say. Even experienced observers of the monarchy admitted that the atmosphere surrounding the story felt highly unusual. As speculation intensified, attention naturally shifted toward the source of the authority behind such a move. A decree of this magnitude, if it truly existed, could not have appeared from nowhere. Someone had approved it. Someone had authorized its circulation. And someone had decided that extraordinary secrecy was necessary. The mystery was no longer simply about a document. It was becoming a story about power, about influence, about who belonged within the monarchy's inner orbit and who did not. And as the rumors continued spreading, many began to suspect that the alleged decree was not the beginning of the story at all. Instead, it may have been the final chapter of a conflict that had been quietly unfolding for years, hidden beneath formal smiles, public appearances, and carefully managed royal traditions. But if the decree truly existed, its origins could be traced back to tensions that had been quietly building behind palace walls for years. For years, the relationship between the crown and Queen Camilla's extended family occupied a delicate space close enough to attract attention, yet distant enough to avoid official controversy. But according to royal commentators, that balance may have begun shifting as questions emerged about influence, access, and the boundaries between public duty and private family interests. What had once seemed routine was suddenly being examined through an entirely different lens. The speculation surrounding the alleged sealed decree did not appear out of nowhere. In fact, many royal observers believe its roots stretch back years, long before whispers of confidential meetings and restricted access began circulating. To understand why the rumors became so explosive, it is necessary to understand the unusual position Camilla's family occupied within the broader royal orbit. Unlike members born into the House of Windsor, Camilla's children existed in a unique category. They were undeniably connected to the monarch through family ties, yet they did not carry royal responsibilities, constitutional obligations, or official duties. For years, that distinction appeared clear. The public largely accepted it, and palace insiders rarely treated it as a source of concern. But royal institutions are built on boundaries. Boundaries define who represents the crown, who speaks on its behalf, and who remains outside the official structure. As King Charles settled into his reign, those boundaries reportedly became the subject of increasing discussion behind closed doors. At first, the conversations were subtle. Royal commentators occasionally questioned how future generations might interpret the growing overlap between royal visibility and private family relationships. Others wondered whether long-established informal arrangements would remain sustainable as the monarchy continued evolving under a new king. The issue was not necessarily about wrongdoing. It was about perception. In royal history, perception often becomes reality. A connection that seems harmless during one era can suddenly become controversial in another. What once appears normal can be re-examined years later through a completely different standard. And according to several observers, that is exactly what may have been happening. Questions reportedly emerged regarding invitations to private gatherings, attendance at certain events, and the broader issue of proximity to royal spaces. While none of these concerns were publicly acknowledged, palace watchers began noticing a growing debate over where the line should be drawn between personal relationships and institutional access. That debate reportedly intensified as Charles's reign entered a more challenging period. The monarchy was already navigating questions about succession, public trust, modernization, and long-term stability. In such an environment, even relatively small issues could suddenly take on far greater significance. Some courtiers were said to be quietly reassessing arrangements that had existed for years without controversy. Others reportedly believed that clearer distinctions would eventually become necessary to protect the institution from future complications. The discussions remained private, but the fact that they were happening at all suggested something important was changing. Meanwhile, royal commentators began detecting subtle signs that old assumptions were no longer being taken for granted. The relationship between the crown and those connected to it through marriage rather than duty was being examined more carefully than before. Not publicly, not officially, but steadily. And as those conversations continued, beneath the surface, a growing number of insiders reportedly came to believe that major decisions were being considered. Decisions that could reshape long-standing understandings about influence, access, and royal proximity. At the time, few people understood where those discussions might lead. Fewer still could have predicted that they would eventually become linked to rumors of a confidential decree. Yet looking back, many now view this period as the moment when the foundations of the controversy were quietly being laid. As those concerns multiplied, attention reportedly turned toward a series of meetings that would later become the focus of intense speculation. Those familiar with palace operations began noticing something unusual. Meetings were being scheduled with remarkable frequency, yet almost nothing was leaking from them. The participants reportedly included senior advisors, constitutional experts, and trusted members of the royal household. Whatever was being discussed appeared serious enough to remain hidden from even experienced palace observers, and that only deepened the mystery. By this point, the questions surrounding royal access had evolved into something far larger. What had started as quiet concerns about boundaries and influence was now moving into territory that appeared far more consequential. According to several royal commentators, the atmosphere inside palace circles had noticeably changed. Conversations that once felt routine were becoming guarded. Long-standing assumptions were being challenged. And behind closed doors, important figures were reportedly gathering with increasing urgency. What attracted attention was not merely the existence of the meetings themselves. The royal household has always relied on consultations, reviews, and confidential discussions. What made these gatherings different was the extraordinary level of discretion surrounding them. Even individuals accustomed to hearing palace whispers reportedly found themselves unable to determine exactly what was being discussed. That silence created a vacuum, and as often happens within royal circles, speculation rushed to fill it. Reports began emerging that senior advisors had been called upon to examine questions extending beyond ordinary household management. Some commentators suggested constitutional matters were being reviewed. Others believed the focus centered on protocol, precedent, and the future shape of royal relationships. While no official confirmation ever surfaced, the consistency of these rumors made them difficult to ignore. The timing only fueled further intrigue. King Charles's reign was unfolding during a period of significant transition for the monarchy. Questions about continuity, modernization, and institutional stability were already occupying the minds of senior figures. Against that backdrop, any private consultation involving constitutional experts immediately attracted attention. Many observers began wondering whether preparations were being made for decisions that could influence the monarchy for years to come. Inside palace circles, the growing confidentiality reportedly became impossible to miss. Meetings appeared carefully managed. Information was tightly controlled. Discussions remained confined to an unusually small group of trusted individuals. The deeper the secrecy became, the more people suspected that the stakes were extraordinarily high. Some royal watchers theorized that the consultations focused on protecting the institution from future complications. Others believed they involved reassessing long-standing arrangements that had never previously required formal review. Regardless of the specific subject, one theme seemed to emerge repeatedly from those following the story closely. The future. Not the next week, not the next month. The future of the monarchy itself. That possibility transformed the conversation. Suddenly, this was no longer simply about access, invitations, or family dynamics. It became a discussion about legacy, about defining where the institution would draw its lines in the years ahead, about determining which traditions would remain untouched and which might be quietly redefined. As the rumors intensified, palace observers began noticing a growing sense of anticipation among those closest to royal affairs. It was as though people understood that something significant was approaching, even if they could not yet identify its exact form. The consultations continued. The secrecy remained intact, and the questions multiplied faster than answers could emerge. Then came the moment when rumors transformed into something far more difficult to dismiss. The breakthrough reportedly arrived not through an official announcement, but through whispers from multiple corners of the royal establishment. Different accounts described the same startling claim. A sealed decree had been issued that fundamentally altered access privileges connected to royal properties, events, and internal circles. Whether every detail was accurate remained uncertain, but the consistency of the reports was impossible to ignore. For months, speculation had existed in fragments. One insider would hint at unusual consultations. Another would reference confidential discussions taking place beyond public view. A third would suggest that significant decisions were approaching. Individually, those claims seemed incomplete. Together, however, they began forming a picture that was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. What transformed the story was the sudden appearance of a common thread running through multiple accounts. People who had no obvious connection to one another were reportedly describing the same thing. A sealed decree whose purpose was not to remove titles or alter succession, but to redefine access. That distinction mattered enormously. Titles carry public significance. Access carries private power. Royal commentators quickly began focusing on what such a decree could actually mean in practice. If the reports were accurate, the issue was not about changing anyone's formal status. Instead, it allegedly involved privileges connected to invitations, attendance at private functions, access to certain estates, and participation within circles traditionally associated with the monarchy's inner world. The implications were profound. For generations, proximity to the crown has carried influence beyond what appears on official documents. Relationships, traditions, and long-standing understandings often shape royal life as much as formal rules. If a decree was indeed targeting access rather than rank, then many observers believed it represented something far more strategic than a public disciplinary measure. And yet, despite the growing rumors, Buckingham Palace remained silent. That silence became one of the most discussed aspects of the entire controversy. In many royal disputes, even limited denials eventually emerge. This time, however, there appeared to be no effort to publicly challenge the reports. No clarification, no explanation, no attempt to redirect attention elsewhere. As a result, media speculation accelerated rapidly. Royal correspondents, commentators, and palace observers began dissecting every available detail. Some suggested the alleged decree reflected a broader effort to strengthen institutional boundaries. Others believed it was connected to long-term planning regarding the monarchy's future. Every new theory seemed to generate three more questions. Public fascination soon reached a level few had anticipated. What had started as an obscure palace rumor evolved into a major topic of discussion among royal watchers. People wanted answers. They wanted confirmation. Most of all, they wanted to know why such extraordinary secrecy appeared necessary if the changes were merely administrative. But the deeper observers looked, the stranger the situation became. The alleged decree itself remained hidden. No verified copy emerged, no official description surfaced, yet the reports refused to disappear. Instead, they grew stronger with each passing day, supported by an expanding network of whispers that seemed to point toward the same conclusion. Something significant had changed. Whether the decree contained every detail being attributed to it remained unclear. But by now, many believed the existence of some form of action was becoming increasingly difficult to deny. The focus was no longer solely on the document. Attention was shifting toward the people affected by it, and more importantly, the response it was generating within the royal establishment. Yet the greatest shock was not the decree itself, it was the reaction unfolding inside royal circles. If the reports were true, the consequences were immediate. Conversations that had once taken place comfortably behind closed doors were suddenly dominated by questions about authority, loyalty, and succession. Some insiders reportedly viewed the move as a necessary defense of institutional boundaries. Others saw it as the most dramatic reshaping of royal relationships in years. What made the situation so extraordinary was not simply the alleged decree itself. It was the reaction that followed. Almost overnight, discussions that had previously remained confined to a small circle began spreading throughout royal networks. Individuals who rarely involved themselves in institutional debates suddenly found themselves taking sides. The issue had evolved beyond access. It had become a question of principle. According to royal commentators, the household appeared increasingly divided over how the reported decision should be interpreted. One camp allegedly viewed the move as an overdue effort to reinforce distinctions that had gradually become blurred over time. To them, the monarchy's strength depended upon maintaining clear boundaries between official duty and personal association. If difficult decisions were required to protect those boundaries, they believed those decisions should be made. Others reportedly saw the matter very differently. Critics of the alleged move questioned whether such restrictions, if they truly existed, were necessary at all. Some worried that redefining long-standing arrangements could create unnecessary tensions inside an institution already navigating significant change. They argued that relationships built over many years could not simply be reduced to questions of protocol and access. As a result, the debate grew more intense with each passing day. At the center of many discussions was the issue of precedent. Royal households rely heavily upon tradition, and traditions often survive because they provide consistency during uncertain times. If access arrangements were indeed being altered, observers wanted to know what precedent justified such a decision and what implications it might carry for future generations. That question proved surprisingly difficult to answer. The deeper commentators examined the controversy. The more it seemed to touch upon larger concerns about the monarchy's future. What should the institution look like in the decades ahead? How should relationships with extended family connections be managed? And where should the line be drawn between personal loyalty and institutional responsibility? Reports suggested that several senior royal figures quietly supported stronger boundaries. While no public endorsements emerged, speculation persists that influential voices within the royal establishment viewed the matter through the lens of long-term stability rather than short-term controversy. To them, preserving clarity today could prevent confusion tomorrow. Yet even supporters of the reported decision recognized the risks involved. Public perception remained a major concern. The monarchy has always depended not only upon constitutional authority, but also upon public confidence. Any action perceived as unnecessarily harsh could create backlash. Any action perceived as too weak could invite further questions. The institution appeared caught between competing pressures, each carrying consequences of its own. As media attention intensified, what had begun as a rumor concerning a confidential decree transformed into something much larger. The discussion was no longer limited to one family connection or one administrative decision. It became a wider conversation about identity, duty, and the evolving structure of the modern monarchy. The controversy had effectively become a mirror reflecting competing visions of the crown's future. Some saw discipline and clarity, others saw disruption and uncertainty. But regardless of perspective, few denied that the issue had exposed deeper tensions that had been quietly building beneath the surface for years. And as those arguments intensified, attention inevitably shifted toward the monarch himself. At the center of every rumor stood one unavoidable question: what role had King Charles played? Some interpretations suggested he had approved the changes. Others argued the initiative came from advisors determined to protect institutional stability. With no official explanation offered, the silence surrounding the king became almost as significant as the decree itself. As the controversy continued to expand, public attention gradually narrowed toward a single figure. The alleged decree had generated countless theories, sparked debates across royal circles, and exposed divisions regarding the future direction of the monarchy. Yet beneath every discussion lingered the same unanswered question. Had the king personally endorsed the reported changes, or was something more complicated unfolding behind the scenes? The absence of clarity only deepened the mystery. Royal watchers quickly found themselves divided into competing camps. One theory suggested that no decision of such significance could have moved forward without the monarch's approval. Supporters of this view argued that access to royal institutions, estates, and functions ultimately falls within a framework shaped by the crown itself. If boundaries were indeed being redrawn, they believed the king must have played some role in authorizing that process. Others saw the situation differently. According to another interpretation, the initiative may have emerged from advisors and senior figures focused primarily on protecting institutional stability. In this version of events, discussions were less about personalities and more about preserving clarity during a period of transition. The monarchy was facing evolving expectations, growing public scrutiny, and increasing pressure to define its future identity. From that perspective, the reported changes could have reflected broader strategic concerns rather than personal preferences. But without confirmation, every explanation remained speculation. That uncertainty created an atmosphere unlike anything seen during the earlier stages of the controversy. The conversation was no longer centered exclusively on Camilla's family connections or the alleged decree itself. It had become a discussion about authority, about decision-making, about where power truly resided within a modern monarchy navigating extraordinary challenges. Meanwhile, the king's silence continued to attract attention. Ordinarily, silence can calm a situation. In this case, it appeared to have the opposite effect. Every day without clarification generated fresh interpretations. Some viewed the lack of comment as evidence that the reports carried weight. Others believed it reflected a deliberate effort to avoid inflaming an already sensitive issue. Regardless of motive, the silence became its own story, and with every passing week, the focus increasingly shifted toward the future. Observers began asking what this controversy revealed about the monarchy's long-term direction. Were stronger institutional boundaries becoming a defining feature of the new era? Were senior figures attempting to establish clearer distinctions between private relationships and official responsibilities? Or was the entire episode simply an example of speculation growing larger than the reality behind it? The problem was that no definitive answers emerged. Instead, the unanswered questions continued accumulating, each one feeding the next. The alleged decree remained shrouded in mystery. The meetings remained unexplained. The king's precise role remained uncertain. Yet together, these unresolved elements created a powerful narrative that extended far beyond the individuals initially connected to the controversy. Because by now, many observers had begun to realize that the real story was no longer about access privileges, invitations, or even palace politics. It was about something much larger: the ongoing struggle to define what the monarchy should become in the years ahead. But the true significance of the controversy extended far beyond one family dispute. Beneath the headlines and speculation lay a deeper struggle, one concerning the very definition of royal duty. Was proximity to the crown a privilege that could be inherited through personal relationships? Or was it something earned through service and responsibility? That debate, according to many observers, became the real story hidden beneath the decree. By this stage, the controversy had evolved far beyond the individuals allegedly connected to it. The rumors surrounding access, confidential meetings, and a sealed decree were still attracting attention. But many royal commentators believed those details no longer represented the heart of the story. Instead, they argued that a much larger question had emerged, one that touched the very foundations of the modern monarchy. For generations, the crown has existed in a delicate balance between family and institution. On one hand, it is a family bound by personal relationships, shared history, and private loyalties. On the other, it is a national institution governed by duty, tradition, and public expectations. Most of the time, those two identities coexist without significant conflict. But every so often, circumstances arise that force the monarchy to choose which principle matters most. According to many observers, this controversy appeared to represent exactly such a moment. The debate quickly became symbolic. Discussions were no longer focused solely on access privileges or palace arrangements. They centered on what proximity to royal power should actually mean. Should closeness to the crown be determined by family connections alone? Or should influence be tied to service, responsibility, and formal commitment to the institution? Those questions resonated far in royal circles. Commentators, historians, and longtime monarchy watchers found themselves revisiting precedents from previous generations. They examined moments when the crown had faced similar tensions between personal loyalty and institutional necessity. Again and again, they returned to the same conclusion. The monarchy has often survived difficult periods by placing duty above emotion, even when doing so carried significant personal consequences. That historical perspective gave the controversy additional weight. What initially appeared to be an isolated dispute now looked more like part of a recurring challenge faced by royal institutions throughout history. Every generation inherits traditions, but every generation must also decide how those traditions will be preserved. In that sense, the alleged decree became less important than the principles it supposedly represented. Public interest remained remarkably intense because people sensed that something larger was at stake. The fascination was not simply about personalities. It was about identity, about what kind of monarchy would emerge in the years ahead. Would the institution continue emphasizing formal roles and responsibilities? Would boundaries become more clearly defined? Or would personal relationships continue shaping access in ways that blurred traditional distinctions? No one seemed entirely certain. Yet that uncertainty only reinforced the significance of the debate. Even those who disagreed about the reported decision often agreed on one point. The controversy had exposed a fundamental conversation about the monarchy's future direction. The questions raised by the rumors were unlikely to disappear simply because public attention eventually moved elsewhere. Because beneath every headline, every theory, and every whispered account of confidential meetings lay the same enduring issue. What does the crown ultimately represent? Family privilege, institutional duty, or some constantly evolving balance between the two? As those questions continued echoing through royal discussions, many observers began to realize that the final legacy of this episode would not be determined by the details of any decree. It would be determined by how people interpreted the principles behind it. And ultimately, that larger question would shape how the entire episode was remembered. Long after the rumors fade and the headlines disappear, this episode may be remembered not for the people involved, but for what it revealed about power inside the modern monarchy. Whether every detail of the alleged decree proves accurate or not, the story exposed a fundamental truth. The crown survives by defining its boundaries, even when doing so creates controversy. As the debate gradually moved beyond daily speculation, a different perspective began to emerge. The focus was no longer solely on confidential meetings, disputed access, or the unanswered questions surrounding the decree itself. Instead, attention shifted toward what the entire episode might ultimately represent in the larger story of the monarchy. History suggests that royal institutions are rarely defined by their easiest moments. They are shaped by periods of uncertainty, by difficult decisions, by choices that generate disagreement long before their consequences become fully understood. In that sense, many observers began viewing this controversy not as an isolated incident, but as part of a much longer process through which the monarchy continuously redefines itself in response to changing circumstances. What made the story so compelling was the contrast at its heart. On one side stood tradition, loyalty, and long-established relationships. On the other stood the demands of institutional preservation. Neither side could easily be dismissed. Neither side existed without emotional consequences. Yet throughout royal history, moments of tension have often forced leaders to determine which principle must ultimately take precedence when the two come into conflict. That reality gave the controversy a significance that extended far beyond its original rumors. Whether people supported the alleged changes or questioned them, many agreed that the discussion highlighted the importance of boundaries within institutions that rely heavily on symbolism and continuity. Boundaries do not always attract attention when they function smoothly, but when they are challenged, examined, or redefined, they suddenly become visible to everyone. The public's fascination with the story reflected that deeper reality. People were not simply interested in palace intrigue. They were responding to questions about authority, responsibility, and legitimacy. The monarchy remains one of the world's most recognizable institutions precisely because it represents continuity across generations. Whenever its internal structures appear to shift, public curiosity naturally follows. And according to many commentators, that curiosity revealed something important. Despite constant predictions of change, the monarchy continues adapting rather than standing still. Every reign introduces new challenges. Every generation confronts different pressures. Yet the institution survives by balancing adaptation with preservation, adjusting where necessary while protecting the principles that define its identity. That balancing act is rarely simple. It often requires choices that create controversy in the present while aiming to secure stability in the future. It demands patience, discipline, and an understanding that public reactions can differ dramatically from historical judgment. What appears divisive today may be viewed very differently years from now. Perhaps that is the true legacy of this entire episode. Not the rumors, not the speculation, not even the alleged decree itself. Rather, It is the reminder that the monarchy's enduring strength has never depended upon avoiding difficult questions. It has depended upon confronting them, however uncomfortable the process may be. Through uncertainty, debate, and occasional conflict, the institution continues attempting to preserve the balance between personal relationships and public duty. And when future generations look back on controversies such as this one, they may remember less about the individuals involved and more about the principles that were tested during the storm. Because in the end, the greatest battles inside the monarchy are rarely fought in public. They are decided in silence, recorded in sealed documents, and remembered as moments when duty outweighed every other consideration. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.